Hi folks, Florida Man here. Today I'm giving you my comments on a game I played on the classic map on PlayDiplomacy called Chrislive. Despite what the rather strange name suggests, it was not actually a live game. Instead, the turns were 7 days long each, except we had only 12 hours each for retreats and builds. I played as Turkey. I began the game very similarly to how I typically do as Turkey, by establishing a decent relationship with each of my neighbors as best I could, and moving in a non-committal way, Constantinople to Bulgaria, Smyrna to Constantinople, and Ankara participating with Russia in a Black Sea bounce. Austria opened in a way that strongly suggested he was more concerned about me and Italy than about Russia, which turned out to be justified. No one occupied Galicia, and instead Russia made a frankly rather bizarre northern opening, in which he sent both Warsaw and Moscow north, despite having no apparent need to do that. I will grant that if Russia was planning to take over Norway, Sweden, and Denmark all in the first 2 years, this might give him a real advantage, but it mostly came off as unnecessarily large investment in the region, neglecting his front with Austria and me completely. On the other hand, the moves seemed destined to pay off, given the way 1901 actually played out. This was because Germany didn't move to Denmark, meaning Russia was guaranteed to take Sweden, and England NMR'd, eliminating the possibility that Russia would not be able to secure Norway in 1901. This was an incredible stroke of good fortune, and possibly good diplomacy, by Russia, albeit mostly out of his direct control. The other major effect of the English NMR was that with the French opening to the English Channel, the English failure to move was to France's advantage. France's opening, by contrast, was very aggressive and very committed to the west. Putting units in the Channel, Picardy, and Burgundy meant that France was giving up on acquiring Iberia in 1901 in exchange for guaranteeing that he'd take Belgium and be in a dominant position against England. Frankly, it's not an opening that I probably would have gone with, but under these peculiar circumstances it wound up being quite effective. Germany's opening was a fairly normal one, guaranteeing the security of Holland and the ability to defend Munich, with the asterisk that I should note this is a clearly pro-Russian opening. The game seemed set for an early English exit and a dominant France, Germany, and/or Russia as a result of England falling apart like a house of cards. In the south, Austria had 2 units next to Romania, but had not moved Trieste at all. Italy seemed to be positioning for a convoy. The game already looked kind of grim for me, because Austria and Italy had no reason not to work together that I could see, and if they did, both the foolish Russian and I were doomed. As fall orders processed, we see Austria and Italy are indeed working together, and I am just as much in trouble as I had expected. Austria supports Italy into Greece, and Italy moves his fleet in instead of his army, which means the only place he can really go from there is east to fight me. If he had convoyed his army there instead, Italy could choose between attacking me and attacking Austria. Slightly to the north, Russia was also doing things that would make Austria and Italy difficult to overcome. Instead of trying to find a way to work with me, he forced me to bounce with him in the Black Sea again. This allowed Austria to walk into Romania without any support. I was stuck in my box in my corner, and the feeling I had in the pit of my stomach of impending destruction solidified. Elsewhere, Russia benefited from England's absence in 1901 by taking both Norway and Sweden, and England, who had surrendered at the end of 1901, was now unoccupied and unmoving. France proposed in the public press that everyone leave England's centres alone until 1905, which was very sportsmanlike but also very foolish on his part, because England dropping out of the game benefited Russia more than anyone else if France and Germany chose not to take any English centres. However, everyone agreed to France's proposal, so he decided that was binding. The result of this is that Germany and France fought over Belgium in 1901, which France won, but it felt a little absurd that France was ignoring the English centres hovering overhead, and fighting a one-on-one war with Germany which would likely drag on for a long time. Going to the build phase, France acquired a new army. Russia built a northern fleet and a Warsaw army, and Austria acquired 2 new armies, while Italy and I built fleets to fight each other. Germany seemed to have missed the build phase. I mentioned before that the build and retreat deadlines were much shorter than the move deadlines, and that ended up really getting Germany in trouble, potentially allowing France to attack him to extra effect in the coming season. In spring 1902, however, France vacated the pivotal region of Burgundy and seemed to be moving to face off against Russia, and Germany made similar moves. Russia, meanwhile, moved to Prussia and the Baltic Sea, as well as Barents Sea, clearly preparing to focus on the west and directly attack Germany. You can see that Germany looks quite vulnerable to Russia's attack here, because Germany's missed builds left the German homeland very inadequately defended. In the south, I continued bouncing with Russia in the Black Sea. When you know you're doomed, as I was, you start thinking about how you can either help a player you like, stop a player you don't like from winning, or at least control who gets your centers. At this point, I was thinking I did not want Russia to get any of my centers. Interestingly, although Italy and Austria supported Austria into Bulgaria, Austria also moved into Tyrolia and the Adriatic Sea, seemingly preparing to attack Italy, and Italy moved into the Tyrrhenian Sea, seemingly preparing for a move west. It seemed to be a misjudged plan on Italy's part, which would very likely result in his downfall at the hands of his early ally. In fall 1902, a new player joined as England. This new player happened to be someone I was familiar with and who was very sympathetic to my situation in the south, so I felt I had a new reason to actually pay attention to the game, at least enough to discuss what was happening with the new arrival. Of course, there was very little that England could do to help me, assuming she would have liked to, but she at least moved against Russia, which I was happy to see. When orders processed, France had supported England into Norwegian Sea, boxing Russia into the Barents Sea region and Scandinavia. France also moved from Belgium into Ruhr, positioning to either attack Germany or support him against Russia. Germany lost Berlin to Russia, but lost no other ground. But unfortunately for him, Austria turned out not to be attacking Italy, but instead moving up to around Germany. In the south, I held my ground against Austria and Russia, bouncing them out of Ionian Sea and Black Sea respectively. Italy continued the moves from spring, taking Tunis and moving into Piedmont to threaten France. I had been shut out in my messaging with Austria, Italy, and Russia earlier, and it became very clear now that it was because all three of them were working together. The Airhead Alliance was experiencing remarkable success in terms of positioning, although it looked to me as if Austria was the dominant player, because he was in a position to stab either or both of his allies, and he was benefiting from the alliance more than anyone else. In the build phase, France built 2 fleets. Italy built another 1, Germany rebuilt his army, and Russia and Austria built 1 army each. In spring 1903, I continued to bounce Russia out of the Black Sea, but I couldn't keep Italy and Austria from advancing to the south, since Italy used Naples to support Adriatic Sea into Ionian. Still, with France advancing against Italy to the south, and me holding my ground to a great degree in the east, I had at least a little hope I could perhaps be rescued. Unfortunately, in fall I lost Aegean Sea, and my hopes diminished just a little bit more. At the same time, Austria advanced to Munich, and Russia took Denmark, reducing Germany to Kiel and Holland. The dominance of the Airhead Alliance seemed unstoppable. The only region of hope, from my perspective, continued to be where France was entering the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, though France was holding his own, he did not have superior numbers to Italy at sea, and Italy was also already in a defensive and defensible position. In the retreat phase, I chose to retreat to Smyrna, and Germany retreated into Burgundy. My retreat was really my only defensive option, besides destroying my fleet and rebuilding as an army, which maybe could have let me try to take the fight to Russia. That probably wouldn't have worked, though. Russia was still moving from strength to strength, and retained a slight edge over even Austria in centers, although I still would have bet on Austria to win a direct fight. In the builds, Germany destroyed the Burgundy army, choosing to stick with France and England as his partners until the end, rather than making a feeble stab into France. Russia built another northern fleet, while Austria built a southern fleet. In spring 1904, Austria and Italy seemed to move into position for a convoy into Syria. I bounced Russia in the Black Sea again, and continued to hold my ground as previously. France and Italy did basically nothing in the west, and my hopes of rescue dimmed considerably. There were no creative tactics coming from that corner, at least not in time to save me. France had not tried to convoy to North Africa, admittedly a risky move, and it seemed unlikely he would ever advance further into the Mediterranean unless Austria stabbed Italy first. In the north, England took Denmark from Russia, the first advance the Western Triple had made against the airheads. In the retreat phase, Russia dropped backward into Baltic Sea, giving him a shot at retaking Denmark, although I wouldn't want to bet on it. In fall, England continued to meet with success against Russia, keeping Denmark and capturing Sweden. Russia gave those spaces up in exchange for being able to force himself into Kiel. France made a little marginal advancement in the Mediterranean, too, taking Piedmont. However, the real piece of news, for me, was that Austria outguessed me. I thought he and Italy were going to try a convoy to Syria, so I moved to counter that, but Austria just walked into Smyrna instead. It was a big mistake on my part, but I'd like to think it just speaks to the tactical skill of the Austrian player. In the build phase, England got 2 new fleets. Austria got a new army, and Russia was forced to destroy one of his fleets on the front with Germany. I was at least contributing to the struggle that much. Russia couldn't afford to destroy the generally useless fleet in Sevastopol, or I would have gotten in there. Going to spring 1905, I am basically surrounded by fleets. It seems to be my final hour. The fight elsewhere continues as inconclusively as ever. At this point, England proposes a draw and makes a case for including everyone in the public press, including me. Going to fall, I trade my 2 current home centers for Smyrna, and at the same time, England stabs France, taking Belgium and walking into mid-Atlantic Ocean. France had actually succeeded in helping Germany retake Kiel this season, so if not for England's sudden betrayal, the game was actually going fairly well for them. In the build phase, only England gets a build. In spring 1906, France continues to actively defend against the Airhead Alliance, but without much hope, since England is now actively tearing down those defenses in collaboration with the enemy. In fall, they finally kill me off. At the same time, England takes 2 French centers and keeps the German center she'd walked into. The last few seasons don't see any fundamental transitions in the progress of the game. There was a strange bit when Italy auto-surrendered and was replaced. Elsewhere, Austria and England both continued to succeed. Austria and Russia fought a little bit, but with no conclusion, and Italy took Marseille successfully. With only 1 center left, France surrendered. In the end, the 4 remaining players agreed to a draw that included all of the survivors. I hope you enjoyed this diplomacy commentary. Today, I'm asking people to comment with what they would like me to do to celebrate on this channel if we reach 1,000 subscribers. We're getting closer all the time now, so there's no reason not to tempt fate by imagining what we should do if we get there. And I'd like to express my appreciation for the names who now appear on screen. They're all supporting the channel, whether through their wallets or with subtitle translations into other languages. Until next time, Florida Man out.